This corresponds with the above-mentioned ability of money to concentrate values. Money is thus one of the great cultural elements whose function it is to assemble great forces at a single point and so to overcome the passive and active opposition to our purposes by this concentration of energies. We should think of the machine in this context, not only for the obvious reason that machinery directs the forces towards our desired ends, but also because every improvement and speeding up of machinery imposes a greater intensity of work upon the worker. This is precisely the reason why progress in technology and the shortening of working time can and must go hand in hand, because the powers of nature and of man serve our purposes in a more concentrated form through improved machinery. We can observe the same cultural tendency at work in the growing preeminence of laws of nature in shaping our worldview, compared with the preoccupation with individual phenomena, or the fortuitousness and narrowness of crude empiricism. A law of nature represents a tremendous concentration of knowledge, summarizing in a brief formula the characteristics and movements of innumerable instances. Through laws of nature the mind compresses the vast array of spatial and temporal events into an intelligible system which contains, so to speak, the whole world. In a quite different sphere, the replacement of hand weapons by firearms shows the same form of development. Gunpowder provides an enormous concentration of power, which unleashes with a minimum of muscular effort an effect otherwise unattainable. It may also be that the significance and the differentiation of the individual personality in the historical development that takes place through the organizations of the clan, the family and the association are subject to the same principle. The active forces radiate more and more from individualized, externally limited representatives. They appear to be more concentrated than before, and the elements that decide the destiny of a group, that are distributed over the group as long as the individual is closely connected with it, are now concentrated in the individual himself. The right of self-determination of modern man could not have emerged if an increased quantity of means of activity had not been brought together in the narrow form of personal existence. There is no contradiction in asserting that, at the same time, the functions of those earlier close communities have been transferred, for the most part, to a much more extensive association, the state. From the point of view of its actual achievements, the life of the modern state, with its bureaucracy, its powers and its centralization, is much more intensive than that of small primitive communities. The modern state is based upon an extraordinary collectivization, integration and unification of all political forces, compared with the waste of energy in a nation that is subdivided into small-scale autonomous communities, the free and differentiated personality on the one hand and the modern state on the other represent an unrivaled concentration of forces. In this way, the energy of society acquires a form that allows a minimum effort to achieve the maximum effect in face of each particular need. It is interesting to note that money not only conforms with this historical trend towards the concentration of forces by expressing the value of things in the most concise and condensed way, but in addition, it confirms this trend by a direct relationship with many of the instances that belong to quite different spheres. For example, in the early stages of firearms money provided the sinews of war, pecunia nervus belli. It wrested weapons from the knights and citizens and handed them over to the mercenary, making the possession and use of weapons a privilege of the owner of wealth. It is hardly necessary to demonstrate how closely the origins and progress of machine technology are connected with the monetary system. But I shall show later that the formation of primary groups which liberated the individual and, concurrently, the development of the state, were very closely related to the emergence of the monetary economy. We can see that the cultural trend towards a concentration of forces has many direct and indirect connections with the money form of values. All the implications of money for other parts of the cultural process. result from its essential function of providing the most concise possible expression and the most intense representation of the economic value of things. The conservation and transfer of values have traditionally been regarded as the principal functions of money, but these are only the crude, secondary manifestations of its basic function. This function obviously has no inner relation to the material value of money, and indeed it becomes evident, through this function, that what is essential in money are the ideas incorporated in it, which point far beyond the significance of its material representatives. The greater the role of money becomes in concentrating values, and this occurs not simply through the increase in its quantity, but through an extension of its function to more and more objects and the consolidation of even more diverse values in this form, the less it will need to be tied to a material substance, for the mechanical sameness and rigidity of a substance will become increasingly inadequate compared with the abundance, mutability, and variety of values which are projected upon and consolidated in the concept of money. This process might be called the growing spiritualization of money, since it is the essence of mental activity to bring unity out of diversity. In the sensible world, things exist side by side, only in the sphere of the mind are they integrated. The elements of a concept form a unity, as do subject and predicate in a proposition. There is no equivalent in the world of directly perceived phenomena. The organism, as the bridge between matter and mind, is the first step towards such an equivalent. Interaction merges its elements, and it strives constantly for an unattainable perfect unity. Only in the mind, however, does interaction become real integration. The interaction of exchange brings about a mental unity of values. The spatially extended substance is only a symbol of money, because the disconnectedness of what exists as substance contradicts the nature of money as an abstract representation of interaction. Only to the extent that the material element recedes does money become real money, that is a real integration and a point of unification of interacting elements of value, which only the mind can accomplish. The increasing significance of money as value, if the functions of money can be exercised in part side by side with its material, and in part independently of the quantity of this material, and if therefore the value of money declines, then this does not mean that there is a general decline in the value of money, but only in determinate quantities of it. The two things do not coincide, and it might almost be said that the less valuable any given quantity of money becomes, the more valuable is money generally. For only when money is cheap and any given amount of it less valuable, can it have the wide diffusion, rapid circulation, and general utility that assure its present role. The same relationship between a particular quantity of money and money in general prevails in the individual mind. It is just the spendthrifts, who part most easily with money for specific purchases, who are at the same time most dependent on money in general. This is one of the meanings of the saying that one can despise money only if one possesses it in abundance. In peaceful times and places, where the tempo of economical life is slow and money circulates sluggishly, a given quantity of money is valued more highly than it is in the economic jungle of modern urban life. The rapid circulation of money induces habits of spending and acquisition. It makes a specific quantity of money psychologically less significant and valuable, while money in general becomes increasingly important because money matters now affect the individual more vitally than they do in a less agitated style of life. We are confronted here with a very common phenomenon, namely, that the total value of something increases to the same extent as the value of its individual parts declines. For example, the size and significance of a social group often becomes greater the less highly the lives and interests of its individual members are valued. The objective culture, the diversity and liveliness of its content attain their highest point through a division of labor that often condemns the individual representative and participant in this culture to a monotonous specialization, narrowness, and stunted growth.